How nice. Good evening. Thank you all for coming out on this cold, rainy day. I'm Otto Penzler. I've been an editor and publisher for nearly 40 years.
Ouch.
I'm so old. During that time, I've worked with most of the great writers in the mystery field at one time or another. Ross Macdonald, James M. Cain, Robert Owen Butler, Joyce Carol Oates, Peter Straub, and many, many others. In that time, I can say this, I've said it behind his back, I could say it to his face, I have never worked with anyone who was a greater pleasure to work with than Brad. Oh, wait a minute. This book, I have a bookshop called The Mysterious Bookshop down in Tribeca. And one of the things that I started to do about 3 years ago was commission a series of short stories called Biblio-Mysteries. They're mystery, crime, suspense stories with books as a background. Books with rare books, or set in a bookstore or a library or a rare book collector, that sort of thing. And I asked Brad to write a short story for me for this series, and he agreed, and he started writing, and he said, I have a great idea. It's a great idea. You are going to love this idea. And he started writing, and he called and said, yeah, I'm working really hard on this. I'm up to about page 50. I said, okay, that's good. Then he called and said, well, sort of page 60, getting close to 70. Then it was 80. Then it was 90. And I said, well, are you getting there? He said, yeah. And it came in at about 110 pages. And I read it, and indeed it was a fabulous idea. And it was called The Forgers. And Brad and I had a lunch. We frequently have lunches, which are one of the great joys of my life. And I know it enhances Brad's. And we talked about this story. And he said, and he and I had been so involved talking about this and reading it and knowing this story so well. We both had the idea that it was too good to waste on a short story. And Brad said, I know exactly what to do. I know how to make this bigger, add material. I think it could be a novel. And I said, let's do it. And we made an agreement, and 4 months later, there it was. And this book has had tremendous success already. It's gone into a second printing. We've sold it in numerous countries worldwide. The reviews have been spectacular. And I have to say, it's just one of the great pleasures of having not only the joy of doing this with a friend, but also having a successful book at the end of the day. It doesn't always work that way, sadly. So now have I sort of stated the history of this book fairly accurately?
I think we're done.
Thank you very much for showing.
Yeah, it was an amazing experience. Today is December 2nd, 2014, and last year today, the book still had another 70 pages to go and was finished at the end of December. It was a white-hot writing experience, the likes of which I never had before. I hope to have it again because it was really something else. When Otto asked me about writing a biblio-mystery, I said, well, what is a biblio-mystery? I never heard the term before. And he said, Brad, there's a book involved and there's a murder. You know, how hard is that? It's like, so if you kill somebody with a Gutenberg Bible over the head, that's a biblio. Yeah,
you're a genius. You can figure this out.
And I instantly thought, I don't know why I thought this, but it was like right in the conversation, I said forgery. And why forgery? Well, because forgers alter history. A really good forger, certainly the masterful ones that are in this book, can change what we perceive to be real. They change the authentic. In fact, they're so arrogant and brilliant that they consider reality to be malleable, like molding clay in a warm room. And so it runs deeper than just books and murder. It really runs into something that interests me a lot, which is the nature of, what's real, how you can toy with the subjectivity of history. In this room tonight, we're all experiencing something that's pretty much the same. But when we go home, and then tomorrow and the next day, everybody's going to have a slightly different idea, and it's going to change again. It'll change again. And it's very interesting to even think about the idea of objectivity. And so that's what kind of got me going on this book. And once I found the voice, too, Otto asked me to do this in the spring last year. And I got one line, which was, "They never found his hands." Because I was thinking, well, what would you want to deprive a forger of that would really be meaningful? Well, the ink, you take away the paper. There's other things you could do that are nasty. But if you remove the hands, then the forger's out of business. So I thought, well, that's great. And I had a first paragraph, and I sat on it for months. Otto was...
Years.
No, months. Months. I write this stuff down, Otto, so I can have proof positive. I sat on it for months, and then one day I thought, I'm going to see if I can get a second paragraph, and then was just on from there.
Brad is noted as a literary writer, a poet who's written children's books, written all kinds of things, but not crime fiction. But since Brad is a collector of rare books, I thought he would be able to write a bibliomystery with the proper background, with the proper depth to make it interesting to anybody who's interested in books. Did the whole notion of your collection, and you have a lot of inscribed books and literary autographs and so on. Were you thinking about that while you were working on this book?
One interviewer asked me, are there any forgeries in your collection? And I said, gosh, I hope not. Yeah, you've got to be very careful. I was actually speaking with the director of a very important rare book library, and he and I were talking about forgery, and he said, I'm sure the library here is full of forgeries. And he said, in a weird way, I sort of like that. He said, it's strange, there are libraries that collect forgeries. There are famous forgers out there from the 19th century and earlier. I'll get back to your question. Like William Ireland and Thomas Chatterton. Have you heard of these folks? They're
Thomas Wise.
T.J. Wise is an amazing forger. And these forgers are actually collectible. I'm not buying them because I don't have enough money to buy. Some of them are really, really expensive. But I really fashioned a little, my main protagonist, my main guy, a little bit on William Ireland. And my forger's name only comes up once in the book. He doesn't like his name. He's a shadow man, so he kind of withdraws it the moment it comes out. But it's a little bit of an homage to William Ireland, whose father was a Shakespeare collector, and there are only several known actually authentic Shakespeare signatures in the world. I think 4 or 5. And so he decided that Dad really could use some Shakespeare manuscript materials. Like, well, do a Hamlet. And I'll write some love letters, Shakespeare's hand. So he discovered a trunk and started giving these manuscripts to Dad. And this is the 19th century, and all the leading experts of the era signed off on these William Shakespeare manuscripts and autographs. It's amazing. I think, what an amazing performance. So to get back to my collection, I've been in the rare book community since I was in my 20s, actually even late teens. but also just used books, used bookshop, and all this. I've just been around books my whole life. So in a way, I realized I've been researching this book my whole adult life. So when I think that's part of the reason it was written so quickly. I had to look up almost nothing. I mean, I really already knew this stuff. So yeah, I think that's my own collection. I hope has no forgeries in it. Most of my inscribed books are from friends of mine. But yeah, it's being around books, being steeped in books really helped me with the whole writing process.
Now that we're talking about collecting, would you like to read a paragraph or two of your book about collecting?
Can I read 3?
You can.
Just 2 pages.
If you're good and quick.
Okay, Otto. Otto doesn't like readings. I think I will have to move up there, I realize, because I can't juggle the book and at the same time. So these are not pages. Is this mic working okay? These are not pages that really have much to do with the forgeries or the crimes in the book. But this is really a little bit of Will. You know, I don't know his last name. I just realized just now. What is Will's last name? It's a little moment where he talks about a moment with his father where his father sort of describes the joy of rare books and the joy of first editions and what the purpose of collecting books is. And they were in a room that's not unlike where we are right now. So here's a couple of pages. My father's legacy as a book collector was key to my education about literary first editions. And the debt I owe to him about all things Arthur Conan Doyle, indeed all things rare books, could never be overstated. He loved pulling down one of his treasured books and showing me precisely what distinguished it, what made it unique. His triple-decker set of Hardy's Tests of the D'Urbervilles, his Emma in original boards, his 6-volume Tom Jones in contemporary speckled calf. Each of these was in superb condition and, as he liked to say, fresh as the day they were born. Especially poignant to him was a book that looked just as it did on publication day, decades or centuries before. Looked just as it did when the author held it in his or her hands for the first time. To possess a pristine copy was to share the author's experience, to virtually exist in another era as a time traveler might, and to join in communion with all those owners down the years who had protected it against time's depravities. That to him was the virtue of condition. Nor did his love of signed and inscribed copies have much to do with ordinary fetishism or pure market investment, although he was both a good investor and surely a fetishist of sorts. Again, it had to do with proximity to the author, that the writer's flesh and blood hand had touched this title page or that piece of fool's cap brought an immeasurable significance to the whole object. Made it distinctive and exceptional, yes, but perhaps even more important, personal and even intimate. Authorial DNA, the scribed phrases and tender inscriptions, lifted even the commonest works into a higher category of value, not just monetary, but, if you will, spiritual. Some of our finest father-son moments had nothing to do with Little League baseball or going camping in the Adirondacks together, but rather took place whenever he got something special in the mail from London or Edinburgh or Paris. He would slowly unwrap the parcel with a look of both boyish excitement and mature satisfaction, and then, after inspecting the rarity with ginger care, hand it to me. This was a little ceremony we both enjoyed, as well as an act of tremendous fatherly trust, I knew. I honored that trust by examining it with the deep shared interest of a newcomer learning from a master, before passing it back to its new owner. Book collecting, he memorably told me, though at the time I couldn't fully grasp his theory, is an act of faith. It's all about the preservation of culture, custodianship, and that's why when I add a book to the collection, I'm taking on the responsibility of keeping it safe. And then there's also the joy of the chase, of striving to find a copy of a book that helped make me who I am. But not just any copy, the most historically interesting and finest copy you can find. Most of all, it's about something I've never quite been able to put into words. There's a line in T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. Have you read that poem yet? I shook my head. Sorry I hadn't, since I knew this was an important moment between us, one that I had better remember for the rest of my life. Well, we'll read it together later. It's a line near the end that goes, "These fragments I have shored against my ruins." Books make us feel alive, and though we obviously won't live forever, they make us feel as if we might. These walls of books in this room, they stand between us and the unknown. And that's why I feel the safest and happiest and most alive right here. I suppose collecting anything is like that. Tin trucks, teddy bears, teapots. Things our ancestors made. We shore them against our ruins, and they give us poor mortals comfort and joy, just like religion does. Books are my religion, I guess you could say, son. Not only the scripture, but the religion itself. I asked him, "What makes a book rare, Dad?" "If I haven't seen it," he said, at first serious, then giving me one of his singular warm smiles.
That's pretty good.
We all know you wrote it.
Brad and I met by telephone a very, very long time ago when you were working as a bookseller in California. And I'm not sure if I was just a collector or if I had already opened my bookshop. But I remember you speaking with unusual intelligence and knowledge back in the day when we talked about books. Have you ever thought about being a bookseller again? Did you like it when you did it?
Well, I loved it when I did it. I loved it. I woke up in the morning, and this is pre-internet, too. This is when you would fly up to San Francisco, and the great Peter Howard, who ran Serendipity Books, would pick me up at the airport, and he would lock me in his bookshop all night. I would scout all night, and they had a little cot for me because I couldn't afford to stay there for too long. I'd scout out books, and oh my God, Tortilla Flat with John Steinbeck. I can still see all these books. It was just a joy. You know, when I sold the business, I did so to start Conjunctions, the literary journal that I still edit to this day, and to interact with more, to become a writer myself, and but I have never given up collecting books. Rare book dealers across the country and the world are dear friends of mine, and I'm lucky to have them as friends. I can't tell you how many hours I've spent here at the Strand Rare Book Room. It's reconfigured now. I like the new, but I liked all the various, versions of the Rare Book Room up here. They've all been my friends over the years, and so yeah. Would I become a rare bookseller again? If I had one more life till I could just live right next to me, I would do it, but I'm running like a maniac just to keep going what I'm doing now. But I never, as you know, I never miss a book fair, and a good example of what a maniac I am, right here at the Strand, and I recommend it to everybody. There's a set of little Nabokov penguin hardcovers downstairs, and they have 17 of them. And so, with Doug's help, I went and picked out the best 17. And then I went online and filled out the rest of the set from England. So now I've got a complete Nabokov hardcover. And what is it worth? It's worth a lot to me. I mean, I love books. I mean, I love sort of completing things. When I first moved to Santa Barbara I went to Yale, and then I moved to Ithaca for a little while. And then when I moved to Santa Barbara, my books weren't with me. I'd sold off some to make the move, so I had to live for a couple of weeks in a rented apartment with no books in it. I was crawling up the walls. I grew up in a household where there were very few books. Almost, there's a broken set of Dickens and some National Geographics, and those aren't books. And a few modern library books that my dad had. But we didn't have books in the house, so I've spent the rest of my life way overcompensating for that deprivation.
Yeah, I think it's easy to tell your depth of affection for books and autographs in the Forgers, and as well as in the short story that you then wrote for the Biblio Mystery series.
Right, The Nature of My Inheritance. Yeah. It's interesting, when I felt pretty bad for Otto because I had promised him something, and then it went way past the train station that we were supposed to arrive in. It's just like went way into the next country. And so literally the day after I finished The Forgers, the novel, and gave it to Otto, I sat right down and started a Biblio Mystery for Otto. And that wasn't too short either, so I don't know what it was, but I love that book. I wrote that in 10 days for you, but I owed it to you, I felt.
It was about 70 pages long, and Brad is known as a meticulous writer. Writes slowly, rewrites, edits, very careful, looking for the right word. So for him to write The Forgers as quickly as he did, and then The Nature of My Inheritance as quickly as you did, is truly remarkable. But I think it is because of what you were saying. Your whole life you've been researching this field, so you were meant to write this kind of story. A little less true, perhaps, of the book that you're working on now, called The Prague Sonata, which is in its 14th year.
I think so. Yeah, I don't just bang these things out, all of them. It's so funny because my first novel took me a long time, Come Sunday, but then I turned around and wrote The Almanac Branch, my second novel, in 6 or 8 months, something like that. Then Trinity Fields, my next novel, took me years. Then Giovanni's Gift was really quite quick, maybe a year at the most. Then it took me 1,000 years to write the next novel, and so forth and so on. But yeah, the Prague Sonata, I've set the poor Prague Sonata aside for 4 books at least. And now I'm in the last 50 or 75 pages of that book, which is
3 more years.
Yeah, something like 3-4 years. No, it'll be done very soon, I hope.
The ending of The Forgers suggests the possibility of a sequel. Is that something that you would consider? I'm now asking in front of witnesses because I want to hear the answer to this as his publisher.
What was the question?
Would you consider a sequel to The
Well, I would
Forgers?
consider almost anything, Otto. I noticed that too. But it wasn't done on purpose. I really there's a writer named Wyndham Lewis who I adore. He's almost unknown now, but he was a vorticist and an amazing writer. He always ended his novels, well, certainly his first novel, Tar, which is 1918, with, I loved it, in the last couple of paragraphs, he introduces a new character. I think her name is Bertha, but I probably am wrong. Do you guys have a copy of Tar around here? Anyway, he introduced a new character. She's walking into the room, and then the book's over. And I thought, oh, damn, that's really cool. I like that a lot. So I want to do that too.
And you did.
And I have, yeah. Many of my books have kind of the introduction. Diviner's Tale has a new character in the last couple of pages. A woman asks a question of her, would you do something for me? Would you come out of, would you divine something for me? Would you? And then the book ends. So yeah, the possibility's there. It's funny that I didn't notice it when I wrote it, but Nicholas Basbane, who's one of the great writers about books, living and breathing today, he wrote a book called On Paper recently. It's just a fantastic book. And his early book is called A Gentle Madness, which is about book collecting, which A Gentle Madness is actually the best definition of book collecting that I know. Basbane, I had him, when I finished the book, Otto's a great bookman, but also I wanted to have 3 people who scared the bejesus out of me read that manuscript to make sure I had everything exactly right. So I had 2 wonderful rare book dealers, James Jaffe, who I've known since I was 20, and Tom Congleton, who runs Between the Covers, who's just an amazing rare book dealer. And I didn't know Nicholas Basmain, but I wrote him sort of out of the blue, would you mind reading this book in manuscript? He said, sure. And so when they read it, and Basmain was the one who said, oh, you've got this all set up for a sequel, Brad. I thought, what? Well, sure, Slater's going to come out of, I'm not going to say names, so-and-so's going to come out of jail. She's going to be, he's going to be mad as hell. It's all set up. All you have to do is just sit down for another few months. So we'll see. Nothing happens before I finish the Prague Sonata. I'm on record saying that, so that's first.
You have promised that to several people by now.
Oh, I don't even want to say this, but when we were down in Miami a couple weeks ago at the Miami Book Fair, I got a Guggenheim to finish the Prague Sonata in 2007. And I bumped into the head of the Guggenheim Foundation. It's like, oh, you got a new book, Brad. Is it? So I owe them this book, and I owe it to myself. It's a very difficult book. It's a very complicated book. It involves an 18th century musical manuscript that was broken up to save it, actually, in 1939 when the Nazis came into Prague. And then a young musicologist actually discovers one of the parts. And so it's a quest novel to put together that manuscript. So it's in Prague, which is like, oh, poor Brad has to go to Prague to research. But I also had to go to Prague, Nebraska. And 2 people in this room have been to Prague, Nebraska with me. I will not drag anybody else to Prague, Nebraska.
2 people in America have been to Prague.
Well, great thing about Prague, I love Prague, is that you can only come in from 2 directions. It says population, I'm going to make the numbers up. You come in one direction, it says population 318. You come from the other direction, it says population 271. I thought, well, it's fewer than both of those. So, yeah, this book will be done.
We have only a moderate amount of time left, and this is generally a good time to ask if you have any questions that you would like to ask Brad. You can ask me, but I won't know the answer. But Brad will. No. You don't. Well then.
No questions? Yeah.
I don't think I need that mic. Oh, it's smart. Oh, sure. This is more about the process of writing, your process of writing. If I understood you correctly, I think you said that you wrote a paragraph and then you put it aside for some months. Is this the book we're talking about? This is a book that you didn't really have to research because you knew a lot about it. I mean, you really had everything down packed. So what's the thought process? Why'd you put it aside?
Oh, because I had that. That's a great question, actually. I'm going to make up an answer. I think I set it aside because I didn't know what came after that first sentence. But I knew I had that sentence. And when I had that sentence, I thought, wow, there's a whole manuscript underneath this one sentence here. And I just had to stew on it for a while. Interestingly, starting with the idea that it was going to be short fiction, a short story. I knew it was going to be a long short story because I already had too many characters and too much I wanted to do with the idea. But before I showed Otto even those pages, there was another character, as you'll see if you read the book, who entered the scene, and that character, that person, another forger, is what messed things up for it being a short story. And then it didn't want to be a novella anymore either. It just really busted out of all that because there was just too much interesting stuff going on. And there was no stretching either. Every sentence really matters in this book. It's all it moves forward in such a way that there's no fat on the bone here. It's actually a very tight for me also a very tight piece of work. So yeah, I just set it aside just because, you know what, I don't even think that's the right term. I didn't set it aside. It set me aside for a while. It didn't have any, we hadn't connected yet. And when I thought, oh yeah, well then I worked on Montauk, this scenario for the opening, and then once that was done, once I had that kind of opening scene, the murder actually, then wow, I was underway. I wanted to get to the forgery stuff.
You've written between The Forgers and then the long short story, The Nature of My Inheritance. You have now written 2 crime novels that are perfectly plotted, meticulously plotted. One of the differences of crime fiction from general fiction is there's an adherence to the Greek arc of beginning, middle, and end, and you need to do all of that in mystery fiction, which you don't always need to do in other forms of literature. Did you find that challenging, or did that just evolve just naturally?
Yeah, there was a kind of a emotional mathematics to the thing. Every piece had to fit together going forward, and it really was like I don't want to make it sound like it's dry, but it was there was a spiritual arithmetic that was involved, and keeping everything up in the air the way I had to, and yeah, I almost don't remember Otto, to tell you the truth. I was so in the midst of it. It was such an immersion that, I don't remember really stepping out of it all that much and standing back and, pulling on my beard and saying, well, what do we have here? It was really such forward motion that I didn't have time. But I knew when I wrote a sentence, or I had an image, or I had some kind of ideation, I knew when it was not right. So I immediately got away from that. So it was like pretty, like writing a book sometimes. There was a very wonderful writer who told me early on, he's like, writing a book is like throwing a rock. You kind of just want to know where it's going to land. So how long is your first book going to be? And I didn't know at the time. He said, well, make it up. Mm-hmm. I said, 620 pages. He said, great. I said, how long is your next book going to be? 430. Something like this. This is William Gaddis, actually. And it was a great lesson. So I had a sense of, once that rock was up in the air, and the rock, when you're writing a narrative, doesn't go straight. It goes like this, like goes all over the place, but eventually lands somewhere. And once that rock was up in the air, as it were, I knew it couldn't really be a short story anymore. I tried to hold it back, but that actually, in a way, helped me keep the book really tight and dense. So I kept that voice going all the way.
Okay. Yeah.
Brad, it's curious. I mean, there are writers who churn out books, Stephen King, Joyce Carol, it's all the time, and yet what you said earlier is that some books take you years and some books take you months. Can you explain that further, how that process works?
No.
Okay.
No, I just think it does have something to do with well, it has to do with your life to some degree. I teach at Bard College, and I had a sabbatical, I had some time off. And it wasn't like I was footloose and kicking around wondering what to do with myself, but I did have a very devoted period of time that was very focused. But why some books take longer than others? I just, why do I like some food better than other food? I mean, it's so organic, the whole thing. Writing a book is it's an experience with yourself that I believe is totally organic. And I know Joyce. I mean, I know writers who, I'll leave Joyce out of this, but I know writers who really can't survive unless they write every single day and they have a certain kind of output. And then I know writers who take, Gaddis, the aforementioned Gaddis, he wrote 4 novels. in a huge, beautiful books. 3 of them are huge. And, it took him, he wrote The Recognitions, came out in 1955. It got slaughtered by reviewers. And then it took him 20 years to write J.R., which won the National Book Award, and everybody kind of made up for the original mistake of trashing The Recognitions. Then it took him another 10 years to write, Carpenter's Gothic. So everybody has their different, I suppose, speeds. Why? I think the reason this book went so quickly was because, as I said, I know about rare books, but also I really like this book. I really like my narrator. I mean, yes, he's a forger. Yeah, he's a bad guy in many ways, but I love him. And I loved having a dialogue with him every day. Makes me wonder about myself. But as somebody asked me, have you ever forged? And I was like, I can barely write my own name. How could I possibly forge? My handwriting is atrocious, as several of you know. So yeah, but it interested me. And again, that whole business about reality and authenticity, I'm really keen on the idea that history is a very subjective matter. Going all the way back to Herodotus, who, when he didn't know the facts, the father of history, when he didn't know the facts, he just made it up. I had a great mentor in Kenneth Rexroth, the San Francisco Renaissance poet. I knew him when I was living in Santa Barbara. He was fantastic. And again, when he didn't know something, he made it up so well. He just, off the top of his head. James Laughlin, who is a New Directions publisher, once told me he made up the name of a French poet just to test Kenneth out. I forget the name. We'll call him Jacques something. Hey, what do you think about Jacques Dupre's poetry, Kenneth? And Kenneth said, can't stand it. But I had a real thing for his wife. He didn't say real thing for her, by the way. He went a little farther than that. And it's like, oh, yes. But yeah, no, I mean, there are obviously objective, factual things in this world, but what interests me about forgery is that it messes with that and you can't get away with it unless you're a real master. You have to know so much to be a forger. You got to know about the authors. You have to know about history. You have to know about paper. You have to know about ink, nibs. The details are enormous, especially if it's one thing to sign a name. I saw a forgery earlier this year at a book fair. It was a Virginia Woolf. It was like way off. Excuse me. And it was signed in an American edition. First of all, Virginia Woolf never came to America. So for her to get an American edition to sign is already a little weird. Possible, but weird. Also, she preferred purple ink. She had different ink colors that she sort of liked. This was in a color, it was in a black that perhaps. The V was wrong. It was pretty pathetic, actually. And and the guy was asking 5 figures for it. And I went to another dealer. No, I'm not a dealer, but I went to a dealer. And I said, did you see that Wolf and so-and-so's? He said, yeah, boy, that's a bad forgery. I mean, at least give me a good forgery.
It was a felt tip pen, too, which was...
Yeah, felt tip pen. Yeah, it's a little anachronistic, right? Since we're at the Strand, I remember years ago coming up here, and they had a signed Willa Cather book, and I'm a big Cather freak. And they showed the signature to me, and it just felt off somehow, but they were so careful about it. I don't think I'm sure they had bought it, but they showed it to other dealers too, and I never saw, they'd never put that book out. I wonder where it went. There may be a dead file for forgeries here at the Strand somewhere in the basement. But yeah, I thought that was very impressive that they would be so meticulous about that.
And didn't you use the line once that a forger, like if you're signing a book and a valuable first edition, you only get one chance?
Yeah, it's a dangerous business.
Yeah,
because if you're going to make a really cool forgery, then you have to get a really rare book. You want to get one of the author's rarest books, and you got that one shot. And if you mess up the forgery, you lose. You know, it's like an Aesop's fable. The one where the dog has some, oh, never mind. But the dog has a beefsteak in its mouth, and it goes up, I think, to a lake or a pond, and it looks down and sees a dog with a bigger beefsteak, and it snaps at the other one, and it loses its beefsteak. It's a little off, but you get the
Nothing
idea.
to do with anything we talked about.
Thank you, Otto.
Considering the technology we have available today, is it really possible to get away with a silent forgery?
I think so, yeah. No question.
Yeah, if somebody's doing the proper research, you will find, depending upon what it is, I mean, if it's a book, then you already have the right paper. All it is then is obviously mastering the signature or the handwriting, depending upon how ambitious the forger is, and getting the proper ink, which is not all that difficult.
It totally can be done. And then, you know, as far as the paper goes, you can buy a period book. And I don't want to actually, this is being filmed, I don't want to give anybody any ideas out there. But, you know, you can, one of the techniques is you can take the blank pages out of the end papers out of the book, and then you're already starting, you're ahead of the game, you've got a period piece of paper. So there's a lot of tricks to the trade. But yeah, I think you can get away with that. But you have to be really good. Also, you know, the rare book dealers out there that I know, these are sharp, smart cookies. These are people who really know their business, and they've handled tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of books. They're the really experienced ones, and you can't get stuff past them as a rule. But I can go online right now. If we had a little thing, I could show you. I'm sure I could pull up some fakes that are for sale on, I don't want to say eBay, but you know, certain places. There are all kinds of Faulkners faked all the time. The difficulty is finding a true Faulkner signature, because he too is he was somebody. You have to know your authors. In other words, some people just don't sign at all. Thomas Pynchon's signature is very rare, but he will sign for certain kind of charitable causes, like a school or something, and then you know it's real. But if you see a Thomas Pynchon signature just floating out there, you know, I was going to say check into the provenance, but you can fake provenance too. That's the whole part of the deal. I was reading in the paper today, some guy was forging paintings, abstract expressionist paintings, and oh yeah? Called the Forger. But this guy is a new one. And, you know, Pollock and Barney's friends, abstract expressionists, they're considered easy to fake, which is complete baloney. They're very hard to fake. But people get away with it. It's sloppy. But this guy somehow got arrested because he put his money into buying a submarine. I love this guy. Excuse me, you forge abstract expressionist paintings and then you buy a submarine? Wow, I wish I had thought of that. It's pretty awesome. What's that?
It wasn't even, it was a movie prop.
Oh, it was a movie prop. Oh my God. It was like a mini sub.
The outfit to live on it. It's like a movie prop.
Well, Orson Welles did that great movie, speaking of movies. F is fake. F's for fake? Yeah, that's great. I watched that a couple of times. Elmery was an astonishing forger. And he's referenced in the novel, too, because he came up with the concept, which is pretty brilliant, that if you forge a painting and it's sold and it's on a museum's wall long enough, it metamorphoses into the real deal. It becomes real over time. I just love the audacity of that notion. Yeah.
Yeah, we have time for one more.
Oh dear. That's a long answer we don't have time for. I'll tell you privately. Yeah, no, I did have input on that cover. It was wonderful. Charles Rue Wood did that cover, and he's a bit of a genius, and he did a lot of different covers before we kind of landed on this one. And he was moving it around to the last moment. There were, I think, the monocle or whatever the part of the glasses were on the front got moved to the back just at the last moment before it went to press. Yeah, the end papers. Yeah, he found that too. One is a Henry James letter, and then one. I'll read it for you. Henry James had pretty. Yeah, he wrote quickly, and then the other is a Conan Doyle letter. They're both pretty interesting letters. Yeah, I think Grove Atlantic and Mysterious Press did a beautiful job with this book in terms of.
Yes, we did.
All right, that's all the time we have for tonight. On behalf of the Strand, thank you to Bradford and Otto for being here. Thank you all so much for coming.